And we're live. Hey guys, so we're doing OCRWC 2017 Post-Mortem. I have done these little post-race analyses in written form usually, but this year I figured I'm gonna pull a couple of buddies in and we'll just chat and see what comes up. So I'm solo. With me I have Peter Dobos and Dennis Wayne Welch of Endurance Project. Peter, I know, has been involved with obstacle course training, which has been an online program that John Albin and Ryan Atkins and is it Matt
Murphy?
Oh, Matt Murphy, that's right, in Australia they've been running. So you've been their community manager, and from what I recall, your background is backcountry skiing and kinesiology, yes?
Yeah, more adventure racing and kinesiology, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And Dennis, so you've been coaching a number of athletes for OCRWC for the past couple of years, is that correct? So you are, how would you describe yourself? Are you a running coach, track and field coach, all of the above? Asphalt and training?
Yeah, basically, a little bit of all of the above. Obviously, background's more running, track and field, but my own personal background, but OCR 2012, since then, been working with OCR athletes.
And I think one of you guys will need to introduce me.
Yeah, I can do that because I know very little about Solo. Solo is kind of everything. She was a psychology professor at the university. She is a nutrition coach. She's an obstacle course racer. She's a blogger. Does that cover most of the good stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I think I pretty much told a friend of mine that my connection to the sport is probably described in the fact that I've been bitching about the sport for about last 6 years or so. So, and
let it go.
So there are over 600 articles right now on my blog on anything from Death Race, Ultra Beast, Spartan Races, Tough Mudder, Gorak, and now OCRWC. So the one thing I actually wanted to ask you guys is, what is your experience with OCRWC specifically? So whether you have helped out, raced, coached, and how far back do you go? Because I think the first OCRWC has taken place, was it 2014? 14, thank you. So Peter, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, 2014, I didn't go. I went in 2015, which was the second year it was in Ohio. And
beautiful state.
Okay, if you say so. I only saw one tiny little part of it, and it was really, really cold and steep. It was a great course, it looked like. It was a great setup, but it was in the middle of nowhere. Like, athletes came, raced, and then vanished because there was nothing to do, nowhere to. There was a beer trailer, which was the saving grace. The way I went there was not to race, not to compete, not to write, not to do anything. I went just to see what it was going to be like because I figured it'd be a really cool experience. And Ryan and Lindsay, who were driving down, were going to be passing literally 10 minutes from my place. So I'm like, can I bum a ride with you guys? And they said, sure.
So you went to spectate and to support, which in itself is kind of a really different experience often from the racing experience, because you get to see a lot of the things that the racers don't get to see. You get to see everybody take off and all the podium finishers finish, where most of the people are usually out on course. So you actually have a very unique vantage point. And then the last 2 years that OCRWC was at Blue Mountain in Ontario, Canada, I believe you were at both of those. And I think last year you were helping build.
Yeah, last year it was Blue Mountain, just 90 minutes north of me. I was like, oh boy, okay, I can get in and really get more involved. So I was up there for about 2 weeks, helping build stuff on the mountain and then
volunteering on course as well, manning some stations.
Course marshal at the low rig. That was insanely stressful. Yeah, the amount of work that goes into putting on something like this, never mind just the build. A friend of mine was having to deal with the 5 different corporate lawyers that were kind of overseeing.
Just in terms of overseeing permits for the event.
You need a $5 million certificate of insurance if you want to set up a table to sell T-shirts. How they got permission to run an obstacle course, I have no idea.
It's a state-of-art event. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then this year you were there.
I volunteered a little bit. I volunteered just helping set up registration, and then I was pretty much just out there to try to watch the race at the front.
So you have
I was there to cheer on Lindsay.
You have an interesting collection of like insights into OCRWC, because over the course of 3 years, you've had a chance to support, to spectate, to volunteer, to build, and you probably have seen most of the admin side of what goes into putting up an event. So you had a little bit of a taste of that. Dennis, what about you? Yeah. Well, I've done enough racing for both of us, I think, those 3 years. So.
There you go.
Dennis, what about you? What has been your experience?
So I missed the 2 years in Ohio, and then coincidentally, I do a lot of work, my full-time day job that's not coaching. We have one of our customers up in London, Ontario, which is maybe a half hour from Peter, maybe 2.5 hours, 2 hours maybe from the course. So last year I just happened to be up there working, and it worked out at the end of the day. Thursday, got off early, was able to shoot up there, spend the weekend. So I didn't race other than the team race. I just happened to jump in with a couple buddies who said, hey, are you racing? I said, no. They said, well, just jump in with us for the team. So I did that on Sunday. Plus I had several athletes that I coach with the Endurance Project. Same thing this year. So this year I've made it more kind of a vacation. So since I'm not really racing anymore, I went up there with the wife, my daughter, and drove up, and we got there Thursday.
And how many athletes have you coached for OCRW?
5K or the 3K course. So this year I had 18 full-time athletes, and then probably a good half dozen or so that I consult a lot that, kind of half participants in the Endurance Project. But so yeah, around 18 full-time athletes this year.
Awesome. And then
so it was cool to come up there and support.
So I was at OCRWC the past 3 years, raced all 3 years, and blogged about it all 3 years. So I think now I have done 6 races in the 3 years at OCRWC between the relay and short course and regular course. So I've now done.
That's weird. That's weird because you only have. That's kind of strange. You only have 4 bands, right?
4 bands. We're going to talk about bands a little bit. So
yeah, okay. Wondering that. Yeah.
But yeah, I never lost a band at OCRWC. So that's my little claim to fame is that I've never lost a band. I've never failed.
Well, wouldn't you have 6 bands if you raced 3 years?
We'll talk about that when we talk about
okay. Gotcha.
That's right. So that's part of the logistics. So why don't we jump into that? So one of the things that, one format that I really like for kind of post-mortem breakdown is what went well, what did not go well, and what would you have done differently if by some unfortunate strike of fate the 3 of us were responsible for organization of OCRWC 2018, God forbid, but we get to play around with that completely hypothetical scenario today. So what went well in the event this year, OCRWC 2017? What stands out as having gone well, Peter?
From my perspective of working behind the scenes, I can say that on-site registration going paperless was orders of magnitude less painful this year than it was last year.
So just as a little aside, so the organizers from, again, what I could see as a racer have switched from paper last year to iPads this year. And this made night and day of a difference just in terms of the process. So the registration was very smooth.
Yeah, and they actually set it up physically as almost an assembly line where, okay, everybody comes here, you go here, and then there were arrows. Okay, you go down the hall and you see these people next and do that. You pick up your stuff here, you drop your stuff off there, merchandise is there, blah, blah, blah. It was better organized. There's more thought put into it. And yeah, going with the iPads, which is a system that 365 Sports had already trialed and loved with Foam Fest and Mud Hero. So they knew what they were doing with it, and they were like, yeah, we should use this. And it turned out to be a good decision. Yeah.
Cool. Dennis, what about you? Anything that stands out to you that's having gone well this year, and you have your contrast and compare between this year and last year?
Yeah, I mean, what Peter said was, yeah, I mean, like, basically the registration was huge. I mean, I didn't have to register either year because I didn't really race. So, but just walking around with some of the athletes I coach and going through the registration process last year, it was just a shit show. I mean, it took forever. I mean, you know, you get there and it might be 30 minutes to get registered, and that's if they can find you on the list. And this year it seemed a lot smoother. You never really saw too many lines or too much backup, even at like the height of the whole, you know, race or whatever. And I mean, the race. I like the race just because, like what Peter says, you bring in a lot of like different brands, and you start bringing in a lot of different minds. So Adrian and his team, they bring in a lot of like different race directors and course designers, which allows you to get outside your own bias and let you kind of open up the channels to gravitate away from just one particular brand. So
the hashtag OCR United, would you say that the event represents that kind of united feel of OCR community? Like, is this event truly representative of sport in general?
I think overall it is. I mean, and you still have a few key players. Like, you don't really see a true Spartan obstacle per se. You don't see a true Tough Mudder obstacle per se. But I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff is kind of, they cherry picked it, so to speak. So you do see the heavy carries. That's kind of like, you know, particular to Spartan and some of the rigs that you see a lot more at Tough Mudder. But cool if both of those, you know, those are the big key players. So if you saw them come on board, I think that'd be huge.
Well, what about the vibe? Like, just the vibe in general in terms of how did it go, and also perhaps the comparison. Did you guys pick up on a difference in a vibe between last year and this year? Because the field was definitely bigger this year. The village was busier. There was definitely just more happening. It felt like it really grew.
Yeah, they added. I don't know if they had all the dinners and kind of scheduled events last year that they had this year, and I think maybe after last year's huge influx, the resort itself was a bit more prepared for, okay, we're going to have like 4,000 or 5,000 people coming into what is essentially their only real down season. The mountain biking shuts the weekend before, and skiing obviously hasn't started yet. So this is like their downtime off season. Normally they're essentially shut down, especially if the weather's crap. So I think that was something where the resort stepped up. And just in general, the vibe at Bloom was night and day what it was at Ohio, just because of the physical venue. You had an actual athletes village, whereas before you didn't. And
well,
you're seeing, like, I got there and it's so cool. You see like a group. Oh, there's the Dutch team going for a jog. There's the Swedish team going for a jog. The first dinner I sat down, I'm like, where are you from? The Netherlands. I'm from the US. You guys, South Africa, mate. I'm like, all at one table, like 5 countries. And it was, yeah, you don't get that.
Well, you're bringing up something interesting, because you actually bring up the role that the venue plays in the vibe that is created, right? Because Blue Mountain as a venue is pretty unique, and it kind of has everything in one place where you can race and then you can hang out, versus what you guys were saying about Ohio. It was such a little isolated place that once you were done, you really had to leave to go anywhere else. So it really seems that the way the venue was laid out really contributed to the vibe itself. So I would imagine that if OCRWC went somewhere else, it would be hard to not look for something similar.
Yeah, I don't think they can stuff this genie back in the bottle. The athletes have experienced it and they overwhelmingly love it. And if you went back to having it in some godforsaken field in the middle of the UK, it wouldn't be pretty.
Well, and I think, you know, being there last year and this year at the same place, so like what Peter said is, you know, the venue itself I think was more prepared because like everything, the bars were later open, you know, the restaurants were open later. You just seem to have a lot more people out and about because I think they knew what they were getting, you know, they knew the venue itself. Maybe last year they didn't really know what was going on, but this year they were there and they were able to get out. And I'd like to see the actual stats of like how many more foreigners came over, you know, across the pond to participate, because this year versus last year, I just heard so many more languages than what I heard last year. Like, you know, you heard them last year, but like this year it was like as much as English almost. Like you heard them all the time, and like you don't know necessarily where they're from, but you can either see from their gear or like just if you know the language. But it was pretty cool to see like all those languages like popping up everywhere, no matter where you went on the course, like running the course or in the venue, it was everywhere. And I mean, that's truly like kind of the Olympic feel, you know, like that's the village feel that the Olympics have that brings everybody from all over the world together.
Well, I had fun translating the rules for Team Russia, for sure. And I mean, I've been asked whether, because I do have 2 passports, so I could technically race for either. So.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting you say that, because this is kind of off topic, but what I saw like at the start line, like when Beard or whoever, like one of the race directors was explaining, you know, the rules, a lot of the foreigners literally like, even though he explained it, they asked the question. I don't think they really necessarily understood. And I think at some point going forward, I think it would be wise to have translators on the start line to be able to like truly, I mean, it's one thing going in a circle on a 400-meter track 5 times, 6 times, whatever. Like everybody understands that. But when you're out there on the course, it's very tough. And like that could cost people, you know, places, points, time, whatever. So I think going forward, that'd be a huge thing to like address.
Well, one of the things I really want to do a little shout out here to Mud Run Guide, because I have seen Margaret and Alexander Nicholas actually pulling in a couple of people to do a little bit of a commentary in languages other than English. So I know I have heard French and I have heard Dutch. So it's interesting because it's already happening, right? And the fact that there is going to be this overlap because Canada being a little bit maybe of a unique place because we are fairly close to Toronto with Blue Mountain, and Toronto being quite a diverse city, there were a lot of people that were locals, Canadians, who nevertheless spoke many, many languages and could actually assist the racers from those other countries, which is how I got kind of how I was able to translate the rules for Team Russia. And I'm sure that has happened for others that maybe spoke German but lived in Canada, spoke Dutch or some of the other languages. I guess the one thing I wanted to ask you guys, and just to be the devil's advocate here, if you consider this Team Sweden, Team Germany, Team Netherlands, whether you think in the future, especially as it grows, whether this will contribute to segregation of athletes at the event itself. Because you could see Team Germany walking around with Team Germany athletes, right? Kind of wearing the same gear and kind of talking to themselves, and Team South Africa doing the same, and Team Russia doing the same. So do you guys see that as being a little bit more of a dividing thing, where the more athletes we're going to get from each nation, the more likely they are going to stay together, especially if they don't have the language to share?
I think it depends on the individual. It doesn't, I mean, people who are gregarious are Yeah, the times when you saw them out together was usually sort of a planned, okay, we're going for a team warm up, or we're going for a team breakfast or something like that. But like I said, in my first dinner, I sat down at a random table and there were four nations mixing it up there. So I would say no, no more so than you would at any other thing like Pan Am Games or Olympics or Commonwealth Games or anything like that. No.
Well, I think with this webinar, Dennis said, it's the Russian, the American, and the Canadian walk into a conference call, right? So I think that this is a pretty good diverse representation here as well. So
that reminds me. Kate, say moose and squirrel.
Moose and squirrel.
Cool. Okay.
How did I do?
It was not
lame. Quite as Russian as you would expect, but
no, it was totally.
No,
Canadian.
If you're looking for like a thick Russian accent, I'm not really like the best person. Like I can pull it out, but I've been living here way too long, so it really just.
Squirrel, come on, moose and squirrel. We make big trouble for moose and squirrel.
Moose and squirrel.
Oh, nailed it. Awesome.
Amazing.
But see, and that's actually the cool thing about, that's the one thing I will say I really like about OCRWC over anything else is, and World Toughest Mudder is similar, but like you get a lot of these like huge groups of like from other countries, and it's their A race or whatever, and they come over and it's a chance to represent their country and stand on the podium with their own flag. And for OCR, that doesn't really exist, like outside of OCRWC for the most part. Most of your other races, Spartan, World Toughest Mudder, it's mostly Canadians, Americans. You don't have a lot of other representation, but like, what was it, like 61 countries or something this year, 67? That's like insane. That's a lot. To see that, especially in a smaller area like Blue Mountain, it's not really that big, so you have no choice but to fly into Toronto for the most part and then drive up. So a lot of those people are catching rides from each other. There's probably people that sat in a cab that don't even speak the same language and rode up together. Last year, Hunter, I think, stayed in like the same room as all the Swedish girls, of course. Like, of course he would. But like, just stuff like that. Like what Peter said, like, I don't think anybody's having that like segregation. I think they literally enjoy being there, to see everything else, see the world, and talk to other people and stuff. So it's cool for the sport, I think.
Do you know, Dennis, is Hunter taking Padawans?
Yeah, I don't know. That's possibly, maybe.
All right.
So we've talked about kind of like the vibe and the diversity and kind of that OCR United feel at OCRWC as something that went really well. Also the logistics, including registration process and the venue, the role the venue has played in creating the experience itself. What about the obstacles themselves? Like how did that go this year? So the variety of obstacles, what we saw, we've already talked a little bit about the fact that we saw a lot of brands represented. So brands aside, what about the innovation factor, the creativity, the interestingness of what we saw?
Dennis, go.
Well, I only saw, so I didn't walk the whole course or anything like Peter probably did. So I stayed in the lower half, which is mainly Athletes Village, and within that area, went up mid-mountain or so. But, from what I saw, what I really like is that they seem to bring in, like, really, innovative type people, like Marco with his obstacle for Northman. Unique stuff that literally is the first time, someone saw it. The rigs and stuff, a rig is a rig for the most part. You can kind of change up the setting of it, but it's a rig. But some of the unique stuff, like I said, the Northman obstacle and some of those other obstacles, it's stuff that people don't get to see in Spartan or World Toughest Mudder or Savage or anything, especially in the States. And I can't speak from like the overseas races, but I know they do a lot more obstacle intensive type races. And I think if you're going to truly have, an obstacle course racing world championship, you need to focus a lot on the obstacles and be innovative, bring a few out that no one's ever seen before every year, so that it throws that mix into it. The Northman obstacle wasn't a hard obstacle, but like what Peter had said before, physics was like a big play in it. And if you really didn't know what you were doing with the levers and everything, you could be as physically fit as you could get, but like completely get screwed. I mean, John Albin actually failed it once. So, I mean, that goes to show you.
Yeah. It was funny. I was talking to Marco, and he said, you know, in the sprint race, when like the lead three guys, John, Ryan, and Hunter, came barreling in, and every single one of them immediately failed it, he was shitting his pants. He's like,
oh, I'm sure I was there, and it was awesome.
It's like, nobody's going to be able to do it. I'm going to have to, you know, put like rungs on the bloody things. But, and it was just a case of they hadn't seen it. It looked dead simple. They didn't take.
And they were coming in hot, and they didn't really think about,
yeah,
you know, they didn't
I
think.
spoke with John after, and he was like, oh, we just didn't respect it. I mean, we just jumped on it and expected to be able to hang on to that first pole and carry it across. Of course, it was wet. It's a fairly new pole. It's not corroded, so they all slipped off.
Yeah.
Every one of them got through easily on the second attempt. So then, yeah, Marco started breathing again, and it was all good.
Well, which is interesting because that actually like talks a little bit about the problem solving when it comes to attacking an obstacle that you haven't seen before, which is where mandatory obstacle
which I think is huge.
Yeah, and mandatory obstacle completion is almost mandatory, right? Like, to kind of repeat myself here, because, you know, if in a race where you would need to do a penalty after one attempt, this would be something pretty frustrating, right? Like, it's just an obstacle that you've never encountered. So to be able to actually try it and fail it and do it again successfully, I think is huge just in the sport.
Yeah, and that brings us into another discussion, which I'm sure we'll touch on soon, which is mandatory obstacle completion always a good thing? But going back to what we're talking about, which was the mix of obstacles and the innovation and how original they were and challenging and epic or whatever. Yeah, for me, the epic award goes to the floating wall setup.
Yeah, that was cool.
Which was, you know, hats off. And I made a point of going up to Hubie and saying, good job, man. This is like shitloads better than what you brought out last year. And it's solid. It's tried. It's really good. It's safe. It's a pain in the ass to transport and build and take down, but it was the highlight for me as far as just looking big and impressive. It was something that I was like, okay, this would not look out of place on a world's toughest mudder course, which from what I've seen, that's where you go to see big monster multi-million-dollar obstacles.
I would actually disagree. I think it was a pretty cool obstacle, but it had mostly visual appeal. It was cool to look at. Like, it was eye candy. It was very spectator. It was very spectator friendly, and of course, it really screwed.
You could walk under it and take upskirt.
Yeah, which is again photos. Very spectator friendly. I don't think it was a difficult obstacle, except for some racers who maybe had trouble with heights. So that the second layer setup was pretty cool for those folks who kind of had to conquer that.
If your grip was trashed, it would have been tough. But no, technically.
Yeah, but not one of the tougher ones. But it was basically like eye candy, like what, you know, and it was cool to go under there and be able to, I videoed Yancey and stuff, like when Yancey was going through, like in his wave, and I took like an entire video, like underneath, and it was cool. Like, so for spectators, which is still to this day a big part of like the whole vibe, especially up there, you need to have obstacles like that, which is really cool, I thought.
Yeah, it was the only obstacle that you could, and that the media people could get into and film. You try that at any of the other ones, the rigs, whatever, marshals are yelling at you, get the hell out of the lane.
Yeah, unless you have a pass,
Yeah. So
maybe next
from that standpoint, and going back to the difficulty, normally Hubie has much more challenging grips on there. A lot of the obstacles, well, not a lot, but a few of the obstacles I know for a fact were told to tone it down for this race to make the obstacles less challenging than they could be or that they normally are.
Yeah, and I think some racers have definitely noticed the dialed down nature of the obstacles they have seen in the original races, right? So if you have raced that race somewhere else, you would have seen a similar obstacle but more challenging. So I think it's interesting when we talk about innovation specifically, because if you've seen discussions happening and like, oh, what obstacle stands out? Almost exclusively people talk about the Northman obstacle, which was the one obstacle that was unique, and we've never seen anything like that before. Where a lot of the other obstacles, they're really cool, but we've seen them. And as Dennis said, a rig is a rig is a rig. And the Dragon's Back has been sort of there, right? Which can be challenging if you've never done Dragon's Back. But once you do Dragon's Back once, that kind of factor of the fear and the thrilling, can I do this, goes away. So maybe that actually could be a good leeway into what areas of improvement did you guys see in this year's event?
In terms of the course and the obstacles?
Well,
I think in general, because I think we've seen some discussions happen online where people were definitely very passionate about expressing their opinions on things that they thought could have gone better. So what were some of the things that stand out to you that you feel could be improved if you were hoping to be at this event next year? These would be some of the things that you'd want resolved.
Peter, you up? You want me to go?
No, I've got some stuff, and I don't have a solution for some of this stuff.
Oh, well, that kind of bitching is the best, Peter. It's the bitching without the solution.
It's like saying, "Hey, this sucks. I don't know how to fix it, but I can tell that it sucks."
Oh dear.
And the major thing is just the backlog that happens with mandatory obstacle completion. When mandatory obstacle completion meets Aru Spartan never quit, never give up attitude, you get people stuck on obstacles for literally days almost.
3.5 hours.
Some people had to be dragged. It's like, it's dark, we're leaving, we're taking the course down. Aru, no, I'm not giving up. So yeah, that's an extreme example, but you very quickly end up with backlogs or long lineups on retry lanes because people are trying the obstacle 10, 15, 20 times. And this isn't just...
Over the course of hours.
Over the course of hours, yeah.
3.5.
Literally.
One person.
Over the course of hours. And this isn't just directed at age groupers and journeymen. This happened to at least a few of the elite racers. Recognizable names in both men's and women's field got stuck and had to retry a dozen, 20 times on certain obstacles before getting through. So
what happens when mandatory obstacle completion meets this very specific hard-headed mentality of I'm not going to quit? Is sort of what you're saying, those two together coexisting contribute to bottlenecks, because if there was a limit on retries, that particular problem would have been alleviated, right? Like you have to complete the obstacle, but you only get X tries, or you only get X amount of time. Yeah, and I would put that out as a possible solution, except that with the volume of racers involved, it would be impossible to police. Dennis, you think you have some thoughts? Did something like this at TMX, but that was a very small course in a very small area with a lot of marshals and a small group of racers. And it was, okay, you have to make 3 legitimate attempts at the obstacle. If you fail that, then you bypass it. What race was it at, Peter?
TMX.
The Tough Mudder X, the 1 mile.
Oh, the TMX, yeah. Dennis, what about you? Have you had thoughts about like sort of this?
I mean, I'll keep it PG. So yeah, I've definitely had thoughts, but the fact is, I mean,
you guys have to realize how difficult this is for Dennis to keep it PG, right? Like this is
Yeah.
like we're witnessing a true feat of mental strength right now. Go ahead.
You might see smoke. I mean, the truth is, I mean, really, what it comes down to is they have to start regulating, whether it be X amount of attempts, but I think time. So let's say you get to an obstacle 10 minutes from the time you start. If you don't get through that obstacle in 10 minutes, you're done. And, you know, a lot of the, like, pure racers, like, have the wherewithal to freaking back out, like Hunter, Ryan Woods. I mean, at this point, you're at a world championships, okay? You're not there just to say you did it, all right? I mean, you don't really see a marathoner break his leg and then, like, limp from mile, like, 12 to 26 just to say he did it. That doesn't really happen. Like, so if you're at a world championship race, you should respect that, I think, and I think you should respect the athletes that are there. And if you can't get it, you can't get it. Like, that's it. Like, come back next year. Like, there isn't a need to sit there and coddle everybody and say, well, let's just keep letting everybody try, because then you bottleneck everybody, you screw everybody behind you, and that's pretty much it. Like, so I think they can definitely do a lot better with the whole, you get 10 minutes on an obstacle, you don't get through it in 10 minutes, go home. Pack your bags, come back next year. That's
so
it.
Then logistically, how would you police that? And I try not to giggle because this was actually quite PG, y'all.
Well, what do you mean? Like, how do you start a running timer on the athletes, and that's where the wave thing comes in too. So obviously, you let each wave clear before you come through with the next one. So, you know, you have 15 people in the first pro wave, and they come through. Like, perfect example, I had a girl that started in the third pro wave. She ran down pretty much all the women in the first pro wave and beat them. Okay. Well, if they started like 3 minutes before. So if they aren't done at that point by the time she gets there, well, a couple more minutes, that's it. You're done. You're out.
So I think you're starting to then talk that logistically it would have to be a much shorter course. And is it possible that the World Championship actually becomes a 3K rather than a 15K? And is 15K too long for a World Championship? Because the one way to regulate...
No. It doesn't have to be shorter. It just needs to be within the confines that can be manageable. I mean, you see it with CrossFit and stuff. CrossFit earlier this year at the games did like the, you know, cyclocross bike thing, and they did like 3 laps. And it was like 3K each lap or something. So it was like 9K or whatever. So that's what they did. And you just basically set it up almost like an indie style track, and you have it run through, and you have your course marshals and true course marshals, true refs, not just volunteers, that regulate that. I mean, you don't see that in anything else. I mean, if someone trips over the first hurdle in the 100-meter hurdles, fuck them. They're done. Like, I mean, that's
and PG just went out the window just like that.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you don't go over and hold their hand and go, hey, you want to retry? No, you're done. Like, that's it. Like, who cares? Like, you can retry and you can redo it, but you're going to be dead last.
You're apples and oranging it, dumbass. Because in the 100-meter hurdles, yeah, you clip a hurdle, you're probably going to fall out of your lane and you're disqualified. Now, in the steeplechase, you clip a hurdle or you fall on your face, you can get back up, you're not disqualified, and you can run people down and finish the race.
You're right. It was apples and oranges, but good catch, Peter, for real. Thank you. That was actually a good catch. You're right. And that's true, though. But it's the same principle. And, I mean, I was just obviously over-elaborating, but it's the same principle. Like, you should at least – if you tripped over the hurdle 15 times, come on. Like, you know, I mean, it doesn't matter what distance it is at that point.
You'd be in the journeyman Olympics then. Yeah, 3% completion.
Well, so one of the things to consider, though, and I really want to throw that out, is that I think bottlenecks were remarkably non-existent this year. And there's definitely been cases, as Dennis has mentioned, that there have been, you know, folks that are faster, that are legitimately faster, that started in later waves that would catch up to the waves before them. But I think between the retrial lanes and kind of having smaller waves in general, like, I have not witnessed any like of the actual backlog jams that I know Peter saw, like even last year at something like Low Rig, right? Like, and I think we can all kind of agree that minimizing bottlenecks at something like a race is actually an incredibly difficult feat combining science and art, right? Like if you guys ever want to look into the complex mathematical equations that go into calculating supply and demand at something like a Disneyland roller coaster, right? Like the one that tries to take into account the different timing and like how long is the line and how fast it's moving.
Traffic management, yeah.
Right.
Or the mathematics of queues and all that crap. Yeah, it's insane. And there's even more variables in something like an obstacle course race, because it's not, lanes of traffic and cars, it's people of wildly varying ability and weather and different obstacles. I mean, who would have thought that a small quarter pipe early on in the race would have stopped and stalled 90% of the men's elite field, which is what it did last year.
Mm-hmm. And what happened with that quarter pipe? Do you remember last year it was frozen over? It was just slippery, right?
It was
on a hip.
I have lots of videos of it online. It's hilarious. The last one I just stopped commentating and put on yakety sax. It was that ridiculous. They were just.
It was on an incline too.
And it was halfway up a hill, halfway up a big climb. There was this sort of flat-ish area, and it was.
But it was too early. Is that the problem? Was it was too early in the race?
Yeah. Everybody was still in one big pack. It was on the first climb, but they figured they're just going to flow over it. None of these guys ever fails a quarter pipe. And I mean, maybe the first 5 guys got over it. After that, it was.
That's what screwed Hunter. I mean, Hunter was backed up.
Hunter
for
was
like
there
10
for
minutes.
7 minutes. Yeah. That was the end of his race.
So one of the things that like this is what you would see in a well-designed course, and this is what we saw this year, is that you're never going to see highly technical obstacles early on, right? Like, so the first things that we saw, you run out, you do a little jog, people start separating a little bit.
Right,
you would
out.
see things like little hurdles maybe, or like sometimes you will see an in, out, through, and then more often than not, you're going to be climbing up a hill, right? And it's
hills and walls and crawls. They may have gone a little bit overboard on that.
But it separates people good, which is kind of nice. I mean, until they figure it out.
The amount and steepness of the climbing in the first third of the course was kind of off the charts.
Oh, do you mean that's the part where you're on all fours, 2 wrists in, 2 knees in, and you're still sliding down like?
Yeah. The first 2 or 3 huge climbs, kind of off on the on the west part of the course. It really spread the racers out, so mission accomplished. But
that's the point. That's what you need to do.
May have been a bit of overkill.
I may have had to use my
so much going up and down and up and down. Yeah, I bet you love that solo.
I freaking hated it. Well, that actually may bring us, because one of the things that was brought out by some of the racers is the safety of the course, right? So between the rope climbs and between like how steep, slick, and muddy it got, and I think especially later in the weekend with something like Regbeck carries up the hill, whether the course was safe and whether the course needs to be safe. Like, is Obstacle Racing Championship, is that supposed to be a safe course? Because I may have seen discussions online about how we can make this event safer and funner. And I'm not really sure that would be very high on my list of priorities when it comes to.
Broke right now. Come on, Dennis. How do we make it safer?
I thought you said you couldn't see my face. Oh my God. The safer. I mean, no one says that. Like, no real athlete says that. Like, most of the people that say this stuff are people that just kind of, I don't know, they're going through the motions some of these are my athletes probably. I mean, I don't know. But like the thing is like do you see a John Albin say that? Do you see a Hunter say that? No, like they're out there to race.
We don't see them say that, Dennis, because they're way too far fucking ahead. We don't know what they're saying. They could be saying anything, right? Maybe they are saying that.
Well,
specifically, when asked after the race, what was the hardest obstacle? John Albin said it was the mountain biking ramp on the way down at the descent.
Yeah, he did say that. And he said even in his blog he said he had to approach it a little differently from last year because it was so wet and slick and it was different angle, whatever. But the thing is,
they weren't allowed to go beside it. They had
they had to actually run up it or whatever. Like, but the thing is like that's the thing. That's the nature of the beast. Like you don't see that in like any other sports where people go, I don't know, like getting hit with like a 250-pound linebacker. That kind of seems unsafe. Like I don't know, like. Helmet to helmet, like, yeah, I mean, they kind of made it a little bit, you can't do that, but, like, you can't just go out there and, like, I mean, safe, what is safe? Like, I mean, the only thing that these people are complaining about, well, not the only thing, the one thing I could potentially see would be the wetness, everything was super wet, okay, maybe you move the sandbag carries and stuff to a flat ground and do something different, but the rope climb, I mean, come on, okay, like, it was too high. There wasn't enough hay underneath it. Oh, well, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's, it's like nature of the beast, I guess. Like, the strong survive. What's the cliche? Like, I don't know. Like,
so there were a couple of things that stood out to me. Actually, this year I noticed the same thing as last year when it comes to safety, because 2 years in a row, the course got rainy, wet, muddy, and super, super slippery. So the only thing that I can think of that I had beef with when it comes to safety was the fact that the yellow tape was wrapped around the metal poles.
Yeah, that part was fun. Yeah.
The metal poles had like little plastic caps on them, but a lot of them were missing.
Some came off. Yeah.
When you were actually coming down, like there was a very real risk of freaking impaling yourself on one of those things.
Now that's different. That's something that isn't a course type thing. That's something that's just kind of they were negligent. Like that isn't necessarily like redesigning this whole course because I need rainbows and butterflies and all that. Like that was more like
that's part of the logistics, right? Like so it's sort of like
I spoke with after the sprint race. One of the things John and Ryan were talking about was, did you hear Hunter take the huge header on the first downhill? Because they both had VJ Sport IROX. Ryan specifically asked John, hey, could you bring me some IROX over?
Yeah, and he brought him some.
Yeah, and at the starting line, John's saying, oh, Hunter's sitting there. He's going, look at my shoes. Look at the tread on this. And John's looking at it and going, mate, you're screwed. And sure enough, Hunter took a huge header, and he slid into one of those rebar things, apparently. And when I heard that, I'm like, could they come up with anything more dangerous to stick in the ground to mark the course? And Ryan told me that it's because of the type of ground. It's hard packed clay full of rocks. And he said he's marked courses like that on this type of terrain before, and it's the only thing they can get that'll stick and
that will hold.
Around.
Yeah, so
sort of making custom designing and making something that'll stick into the ground.
No, but you could put tennis balls on top or something legit and make sure that everything is the top. I mean, the rebar itself isn't the rebar that's exposed with no top on it. That's a problem. So put anything on it. Put a beer bottle on it. I don't know, but put tennis balls or something.
Yeah. It's just not. It struck me as being like a complete no-brainer. Like, why would you even do that? Turns out there was a reason. Yeah.
And there often is, right? And this is where it's nice to have a little bit of an insight in terms of like the logistics and the how-to, because there is often an explanation like that. So could we do it better? And like what Dennis was saying, it's like, well, maybe there is no other way to do it, and we need the rebars, but then maybe we have 3 tennis balls on top of each other, right? Like they're bright yellow and they're soft and padded instead of the plastic caps that very easily flip off.
Or you use those yellow plastic tent pegs and you just hammer it in until it's flush with the ground.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, we go around in circles all day, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're always going to have people complain. It doesn't matter what it is. And because you give people a voice to complain, and that's where the problem is. And again, shot putters don't bitch about the weight of the shot put being too heavy. You know, hurdlers don't bitch about the hurdles being too high because they know that's what they have to contend with, and that's it. Like, period. And it could be in the rain. It could be in the snow. It's the same shit. It doesn't matter. Like, but the problem is do you allow people to have a voice in this too much, and they're just going to keep on. They're just going to always be about
part
something.
of it, though, it's not a standardized sport. So you could actually argue that you're showing up not knowing what you're going to be asked to do, right? Like, so if I show up as a shot putter or as a, track and field athlete, I know exactly what I'm going to be asked to do, and I can train for that, right?
It's shot put.
Shot put. Well, there's my
Shot
Russian
putters.
coming up. Shot putters, not shot putters.
No, putting is golf. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking we were talking about.
No, you don't. You're weird.
So many ways,
Yeah.
Peter.
I know.
Shooting fish in a barrel. So
That's what she says is it's not. They can bitch and complain about this rope climb was shitty because these are the types of rope climbs I'm used to and what I've seen in other races.
Yeah.
Because there's no standardization. Or this.
Right. No, you're right, and that's
The spear throw sucked because my spear went right through the hay bales, and the marshal made me do burpees because it was a shitty constructed target.
But I think that's actually a great point, even in comparison to something like the rope climb was too slick or was too high, was too dangerous, and there was no hay underneath, because what it tells you is that it was too high, too dangerous in comparison to what I'm used to, in comparison to what I have done in other races. And those are my baselines, and that's what I know, right? And that's really the only baseline that we ever operate from anyway.
well.
We keep mentioning the rope climb. The only thing I saw about the rope climb that struck me as being unnecessarily or lazily risky was the fact that that the bell wasn't right at the top of the rope. You had to reach out to hit the bell.
And I actually wonder if that was on purpose, because to me, that was that additional challenge of being there at the top. You couldn't just hit it, like you actually had to lock and reach. So could have been intentional, and we'll never know. Maybe the race designers can give us a little insight.
Yeah.
There was one other thing I wanted to mention, and then maybe we can kind of wrap this party up. And this was the timing. So you guys mentioned, like, I know Dennis, you mentioned a couple of times that some of your athletes have caught up to people that started earlier. I know some of the journeymen that started much later in the day on a Sunday were quite upset with only having 5 hours to finish the race. So how did you guys feel about the timing of the waves?
I read that article again, the one about the journeyman.
Oh, so Peter's referring to an article.
I went to World Champs and I got a medal and an asterisk.
Okay.
It was well written. It was. It made some good points, and the point wasn't that, gee, we only had 5 hours to finish the course, and you kept a straight face really well saying all of that, Solo. It was the fact that they started them at 2:45, knowing full well that it would be dark in 4 hours. And in fact, and I posted this a couple of days before the race, given the orientation of the mountain, you lose the sun an hour earlier. So it's actually, you're actually, the sun has set for all intents and purposes by 5:30. So it wasn't so much the 5 hour cutoff, it was the fact that you didn't give them the full 5 hours.
Of daylight.
Because you set them up so that it would be dark. And I looked through the rule books and I looked through the athlete handbook to see if there was anything saying, all journeymen must have a headlamp. I didn't see that in there anywhere.
Well, and I mean, that brings up a point of whose responsibility is it to know that you need a headlamp once the sun goes down, right? Because if you're, if we're in Canada in October, starting a race at 2:45 and you're heading into the woods, do you then need to bring a headlamp? And would headlamps have made a difference for journeymen in the pouring rain at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock when the race course was chewed up by thousands of racers that have gone before them? And I've seen various suggestions, because like where would they, or when would they have started instead? And I think some folks suggested that maybe Journeyman Wave should have a separate day, say on a Monday, to start in the morning and be like have the full 5 hours or whatever the amount was. I think Dennis is like dying to say something. Go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking about like how none of this really makes sense. I mean, like what Peter said before, and he said it like a couple days ago. I mean, it makes sense, the whole light and the angles and physics and blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is 5 hours to run 9 miles. Holy shit. Like, I don't know. Maybe my math's wrong here, but like what, 180 minutes is 3 hours, 9 miles. That's what, 20-minute mile pace. I mean, if you can't do that, you don't belong there. I mean, that to me, period. That's it. Like 3 hours should be the cutoff for the 15K. If you can't get those cutoffs by then, if you can't get those cutoffs by then, well, then you got to come back next year and train harder. I mean, like, let's be realistic here. Like, I mean, be honest. Like 3 hours to do 9 miles, I could do that bear crawling with my daughter on my back. I mean, come on. We got to start making some standards for this stuff. I mean,
so to be fair, and I mean, I never claimed to be fast. I was out there for probably like 3:45, and I wasn't really like napping.
Then come back next time. Come back next year.
So then you're saying that the cutoff should be 3 hours for the entire course, and
Absolutely.
There should be no Journeyman Wave altogether.
Personally, I'd make it like 2:45, but 3 hours is a good stretch. That's pretty decent. Like,
would you make any concessions to age groups like Boston Marathon does with
no, none. 3 hours for 9 miles. Come on. That's 20-minute mile pace. I mean, what Albin do it in? 120, 123? Come on.
So then how do you judge, like, how do you come up with 3 hours? Is it based on average completion time of a male winner specifically? Yeah. And how does that take into account the female?
Well, I mean, 3 hours is very real. I mean, let's think about it. Like 20-minute mile pace for, don't matter what conditions you're really in. I mean, you'd have to be like.
Buddy, you haven't done enough extreme endurance events. If 20-minute miles surprise you, I've done miles that have taken me 45 minutes or an hour. Because I was carrying 100 pounds on my back, crawling.
You're correct.
Literally.
You're correct. That's the death races. That's the adventure races. That's the crazy stuff that they exploit, killing people for no reason, being stupid. Ruck, perfect example. Dumb, but like this whole 9 miles for 3 hours. Come on.
How you really feel?
Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Like, it's a world championship. I mean, they shut the course down at the Olympics in the marathon. Like, they don't sit there and let you have all day. Like, I mean, you don't get all day to run a 5K or a 10K or anything else. Like, you don't get all day to swim or kayak, whatever it is.
And to be fair, so, I mean, I hear you. And, I mean, I know you're really passionate about it in terms of, like, you have to be fast enough to be at the World Championship.
Yeah, I don't care about feelings. I care about performance. I'm not really a feelings guy.
Hold on. So don't interrupt. So you have to be fast enough to be at the World Championship. And World Championships right now, the OCRWC is one of the few events that actually has standards in place. In fact, I would say they broke new ground a number of years ago when they were one of the first events that said, you know what, you can't just show up. You need to qualify.
If you call those standards, yes.
Yeah, and I do call those standards, and I think many people call those standards. So I think what you're trying to say in not so many words is that the standards should be more stringent for the World Championship, right? And I think we've already seen that too, because in the sport in general, you've actually started seeing the distinction between the pro wave and the age group, where the pro wave has significantly more stringent standards. So Peter, what about you? Do you have any thoughts minus the swear words on this, or?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. I just didn't want to interrupt. You guys were having a nice back and forth. As far as having a time cutoff on the course, absolutely, you should have one. Every race has one. Some of them are short, some of them are long. Ironman World Champs in Kona, you have until midnight, which some might say, oh, that's really, really slow. Others would say that's really, really tough. And some people would say it's just right. So if everybody's disagreeing, then you're probably in the right ballpark. And going back to, this has nothing to do with the complaint that was voiced. That was, you've established a 5-hour cutoff, but then you scheduled it so that you were never going to be able to give us
that part. I agree with.
Yeah. So that's separate from the whole thing. Should there be a cutoff? Should there be higher standards? Yes and yes. However, as we talked about before coming into this part of the discussion, the sport isn't standardized, and I could go a couple of years ago. I could go to a race that was in Toronto, put on by Jesse. It was mostly pavement and trail. It was dead flat, like the total climb was 0 feet. It was a small field. No elite racers were there. I could qualify. Almost anyone could qualify. So there need to be standards applied to what races can be used and what the finishing times are in those races in order to let you qualify. You can't just say, okay, you do any OCR from this list and you finish top whatever you're in, this is what you get. And it's a hot mess trying to not only police your own standards, but then how are you going to enforce standards on a whole slew of different racing brands, saying, oh, you need to have the course at least this long, or you need at least this much climb, or you need at least this obstacle density, or you need to have at least this many people in order to qualify as a division or a category.
Yeah, I think this is kind of, it goes back to, it's very easy to throw kind of like things around, but when you come down to looking at the actual solutions, you start understanding how difficult the implementation of those logistics are. And it comes down to two things, and it always comes down to two things, and it's time and money, right? And I don't know about time, but I know money is not necessarily easy to come by in this particular sport.
It's not just, in this case, it's not just time and money.
No.
It's race directors and race brands either listening to you or ignoring you. I mean, you can't, can't tell them, if OCR World Champ says, okay, here are our criteria for qualifying races, and then racers read those and they have their favorite race series, and suddenly they're not on the list because they're missing X, Y, and Z, they're all going to start bitching at that race saying, hey, you need to make these changes because this other race over here that I want to do tells you that you should, or tells you that you need them in order to be a qualifying race, and I like your races and I want to qualify, so make those changes. And then you've got this race director over here effectively hanging this race director over here hostage.
Well, that's why you don't need the other race directors, and eventually, I mean, again, and then what Solo said, it comes back to kind of time and money. Right now, they don't have enough of either, but eventually, the goal would be for OCRWC, Adrian and his crew, to basically have regional qualifiers in their own races, and you make this certain, like, top 10, whatever it is, they come up with some sort of number, and you make this, or you don't. And that's it. So once you do, and you make that, you go on to the World Championships, wherever it's at, and then they have the journeyman wave. That's it. Like, you don't need, like, these crazy numbers. But I understand what they're getting at, because they have to have the money. Right now, the money drives it. They can't put it on without 5,000.
The only brand that can pull it off is actually pulling it off, because Spartan has just introduced regional qualifiers moving in just that direction, right?
Because they have a payroll, they have the bankroll that can do it.
So, but we see what like increased funds can do, right? Like, so I think all the races are moving in the same direction. It's just a matter of when. As OCRWC has been growing year to year, just not at the same rate as the series, because it is a once-a-year event largely. right? I think we will see that growth. Now, and I want to make sure we kind of wrap it up, and we're not here for 4 hours, as I'm sure we could be. Speaking of, the race directors listening and giving feedback, because at the end of the day, it's just kind of 3 of us talking about what we've observed from 3 very different vantage points. But for you guys here, as I'm sure you know, and anyone watching, I want to encourage you to actually fill out the survey that OCRWC has sent out, collecting feedback. So asking you directly what could be improved, right? So if anything that we spoke about today here made sense, or you have your own things to add, the race organizers are actually looking for your input as they're designing the courses to come. So any kind of 1-sentence summary sign-offs? You got any takeaways or words of wisdom and advice here, Peter?
Yeah. Brains win races.
Brains win races, not biceps?
Not biceps.
Oh.
Sorry.
Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really, like no key points, but just, basically train. Get out there and train. Don't be stupid. Don't do back-to-back races every fucking weekend. That's the main takeaway. Like, stop being dumb.
Don't be dumb. Well, I think you're actually agreeing with Peter there. Brains win races.
Really? Because where?
Well, Peter just said brains win races, and you're talking about intelligent training. So I think you guys are very much on the same page there.
We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah, except Peter's got a really cool hair part that I don't.
There's that.
You've got one under your hat, maybe.
So
Nope.
my takeaway, I would say,
It's all part.
the takeaway for me, I think, it was just really awesome to have been part of this event for the last 3 years, and I've seen it grow and change by leaps and bounds. So I'm always going to find something to compliment, and I'm always going to find something to criticize, because that's what I do. And I hope to.
Really? You? Oh.
Absolutely, that's what I do. I hope to have this opportunity again in about a year from now, and if all goes well, maybe the 3 of us can get together and bitch about OCRWC 2018.
It's somewhere in Europe, like
Peter's getting all
somewhere in Europe. All right, signing off, you guys. Bye.
the